Reporting live from Remembrance 95.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, to Tom Baker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in that case I'll stay. I had brought my bag. If it had been less than that, I would have just kept on walking. I think I'm absolutely nourished, by this unchanging affection and enthusiasm of fans. I often think that the affection of fans, sometimes they want to say the love of fans, is actually greater than the ordinary love that bonds other people. The thing is that fans seem to be so constant and unchanging in their affection, which pleases me very much. Even though the years rattle people and things change, and so that awful things happen to me, except when I'm near fans who are always nice to me. Quite recently, I was in Silkstown in Soho, and as I was walking in to do my voiceover, because I'm in great demand for instant sincerity in corporate video, and as I was walking in, a man who looked quite sane to me said, "Excuse me." I said, "Yes." I was feeling rather benevolent. "Yes." He said, "I'll never forgive you for what you did to our grammar schools." I said, "What? What did you say?" He said, "I'll never forgive you, and neither will my wife. Neither of us will forgive you for what you did to our grammar schools." So suddenly I was transformed. I was feeling like Mother Teresa one minute. Then the next minute I was quite angry. I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, I do beg your pardon. I thought for a moment you were Shirley Williams." So I was absolutely shattered by this. It is true, I had my anorak on and my hair was rather long. So I went in, and one of the technicians called Ian said, "What's the matter, Tom?" I said, "A terrible thing just happened to me, Ian." I said, "Some man outside who looked quite sane otherwise just said to me he thought I looked like Shirley Williams." I said, "Why are you looking at me like that, Ian?" Well, he said, "Tom, you do look a bit like Shirley Williams, actually." And I mean to tell you, he's not a fan of Doctor Who. And so I think actually what happens is over the years, it's only the real fans who don't mistake me. And so I get so exhausted being mistaken, and it makes me very anxious. When I was at BAFTA, where I often loiter in the hope of being rediscovered, I was standing there at the bar, being desperately ignored, and suddenly a voice behind me said, "Hello, Tom," with that awful inflection which suggests when you turn round, aren't you going to be surprised? So I turned round quite carefully, and there was a woman standing there, quite a pleasant-looking woman, also seemed to be sane. And she said, "Well?" And I said, "How are you?" And she said, "You don't recognize me, do you? You don't remember me?" I said, "Oh, yes, yeah, of course I remember you." I said, "Of course I do. We were at the National Theatre together." That's always a good way to say it. So many people go to the National Theatre. She said, "No." I said, "No, of course not." I wonder why. I said, "It was the Royal Shakespeare Company, wasn't it? It was a gawky play, The Lower Depths." "No," she said, "it wasn't." I thought, why doesn't she drop dead? I said, "Well, I know. It was Granada, wasn't it? Played for today?" She said, "No, it wasn't." Very unhelpfully. I said, "But I'm so sorry." I said, "But it was a play, wasn't it?" She said, "No, we used to be married." I said, now this is very hard to take, because I spun round to seize my pint and drank it, and I thought, who does she think I am? When I turned round, fortunately, she's gone. So I wasn't actually absolutely certain that the whole event had happened. But someone did come over and said, "Who was that woman you were talking with?" I said, "I've no idea. I've no idea. And if you meet her later, don't listen to a word she's got to say." Because the thing is, having been a Doctor Who, which is the only reason why I'm here today, and which is the big reason why I received so lots of mail, it was that sense of one certainty in my life that reassured me all the time. and which, of course, it's very easy to shatter when I'm mistaken for Shirley Williams or someone's husband from long ago. And so my worst nightmare, which came true, which some of you may have seen, but I'm reminded of its terrible anxiety, was when I was in a taxi cab, and I'm very frightened of taxi drivers, mostly because of their political views. And the taxi driver, I was rather drunk. This sometimes happens, it may have been a Friday, and I was going from Soho to Notting Hill Gate, and being rather drunk, I got a taxi going the wrong way. That really puts a long time on the thing. The taxi drivers like it, though. And I sat down there trying to recover from my gin and tonic, feeling slightly guilty. And I thought, maybe he's not going to talk to me. And then I could see him glancing at me in the window, that funny little glass they look at, whatever that's called. And suddenly he said, "It's a pleasure to have you in the cab, Mr. Pertwee." And I can't tell you, it's a terrible thing, is it? Because I was really deeply wounded by this thing. And I said, but, you know, crawling in the hope anyway, I thought, well, if he doesn't like me, he'll like me as Mr. Pertwee. So I said, "It's a pleasure to be in the cab." "Yeah, it is, yeah." Or maybe he'll shut up now. But no, he wouldn't shut up. "Yeah," he said, "it's a great pleasure to have you in the cab, Mr. Pertwee." He said, "You know something, I'll tell you something amazing, Mr. Pertwee. I don't know why, Pertwee is a lovely name, but every time he called me Pertwee, it was like a stab in my heart." He said, "Yeah, I'll tell you something amazing, Mr. Pertwee." He said, "My wife," get this, and then he nearly went into a truck. He said, "Get this," he said, "my wife thinks you're very sexy." He said it with that kind of withering contempt, you know, that men who don't really love their wives say, you know, they quote their wives as being absolutely uninformed. As if to say, "Isn't that absolutely incredible?" I said, "Well, that's lovely, isn't it?" Yeah. He said, "You wouldn't say that if you knew my wife." That's the sort of thing, you know, that kind of chalk level of humor. I said, "Oh, I don't know, I'm very pleased." "Yeah," he said, she does think you're very sexy. "What about all those frilly shirts you wore, Mr. Pertwee?" He said, "Was they yours, sir? Or, I mean, you know, or did the BBC, the taxpayers, give them to you?" I said, "Oh, the taxpayers, yeah, taxpayers." "Yeah," he said, "that's great." And so it went on, and he kept hammering the nail of Mr. Pertwee into me, and I shrank more and more in the back and longed for death, which is the effect that certain BBC comedy programs and taxi drivers nearly always have on me. And then he suddenly developed the other thing. I knew it was coming. He started to run through the whole history of the program, which has happened to me scores of times. And we went from Bill to Patrick, naturally, to John Pertwee and everything like that. And I knew it was coming, and I began to absolutely shake all over. He said, "By the way, Mr. Pertwee," he said, "who was that fellow that came after you?" Oh, I thought I've arrived. I thought I'll win him over, you know, abject. I thought. So I said, "Hold on, just a minute. It was, do you mean tall, curly-headed fella?" "Yeah." He said, "That's the one, yeah." I said, "Tom Baker." "That's it," he said, "Tom Baker." Oh, bloody hell, Mr. Pertwee. What a bleeding pisspot he was. So I said, I really was deeply wounded by now. I said, "Really? Was he?" "Oh, Christ," he said, "drunk all the time. He used to throw up all over the place, kick over tables in restaurants. Cab drivers wouldn't take him, you know. He's always been sick in the cab." I said, "Was he?" I desperately tried to remember all these terrible incidents while he described what a frightful piss artist I was. I said, yeah. Anyway, so the lull went on, and I lay there trembling in my guilt from all these forgotten throwings up and knocking over the table. And then suddenly said, "What happened to him there, Mr. Pertwee?" And I said, desperate for some affection and some remembrance, I said, "Oh, didn't you hear about it?" I said, "You know, he actually died in a basement flat in Clapham, absolutely potless he was. Yeah, he died without a pot to piss in." And the fellow said, "Oh, did he?" And I thought to myself, just a minute, don't take it that easily. I said, "Yeah, absolutely potless, not a friend in the world." He said, "There you are then, yeah." I said, "Yes, and if you go there to St. Michael and all the holy angels," I said, inventing the name of the church, "just by South Elm Road, I said, some of the winos there who were very fond of him, they were his only friends at the end, and they go and they sit round his grave because they can still smell the Carlsberg Special. And they by that time, you know, we've arrived at Notting Hill Gate, and I got out, and he said, by the way, can you do the business, Mr. Pertwee? So he gave me his autograph book for the grandchildren, and so I signed Best Wishes, Tom Baker, R.I.P. And I gave it to him open, and he just flicked it closed and threw it on the dashboard. And then, this is a terrible confession, I gave him a £2 tip in a desperate hope that even that might win him over, you know, to look at me carefully. He said, thanks a lot, Mr. Pertwee, pleasure to have you in the cab, and off he went. And I stood there and I thought, why did I give him that £2 tip after this crucifixion that I've been through? Why did I do that? And then I suddenly realized, I know my weaknesses quite well, I suddenly realized the reason was, of course, I was afraid that he was going to go round a corner, which I believe he did, to a cab rank where they all go, and he'd say, hey, you'll never believe this, I had that tosser Tom Baker in the cab this afternoon, and I pretended he was John Pertwee. Boy, oh boy, the wanker gave me a £2 tip. So you see, that is the terrible confession of weakness, about these confessions about wanting to know who I was, because, of course, like lots of actors, I have had an acute identity problem all my life. That's one of the reasons I became an actor. But the only certainty in my life, which is, and the evidence of this is your reaction to me here, the only certainty is that I was once the hero and played Doctor Who. And that has been the one enduring thing, you know, so that when ladies say, we used to be married, or people say, hello, Mr. Pertwee, to wound me, or whatever it is, when actually, of course, in the past, I was mistaken for Jonathan Miller, or in my youth for Tom Jones, or earlier than that for Burt Lancaster's stand-in. But now to be reduced to being mistaken for Shirley Williams, who I'm sure is a charming woman, wounds me terribly, you see. And so all these things have come back to me as I, in the last year or so, not liking much of the work that's been offered to me, I have actually retreated into my past, having learned to use a simple word processor, to try and recall where I come from and, you know, what my origins, what the influences on me were. And it's been quite interesting, you know, everyone recalls their past. But to actually sit in front of a screen with not much else to do and remember one's Auntie Louie and one's Auntie Maggie and those early days of my infancy and those great influences that have made me such as the wreck I am. And I'm afraid that actually I have to blame it. I hope you take my, I don't say this timidly because I mean it. I'm afraid I have to blame it on God, really. There was this terrible disappointment I had because, you know, I had a great thing with God. I mean, we were really bonded, you know. I mean, I was devoted to him, and he seemed devoted to me. And then somehow or other we separated when I got in the army, and occasionally he jangles a bell in my head as if to say, shouldn't we get back together again? And somehow I can't make that leap. But when I was a child, and I look back on it, everything that influenced me actually was to do with religion, and was to do particularly with Roman Catholicism and Liverpool Irish Roman Catholicism, which actually, you know, announced with terrific certainty and at the tops of their voices what was what and what we had to do. And so it was suddenly that I realized that it was, looking back on that what got me into acting was this kind of drama of religion. First of all, I have to confess a very early impulse to put frocks on. In fact, I still have it rather much, because, but if I go down to the pub wearing one of my wife's frocks, which is a bit tight on me, my pals in the pub who are supposed to be, say, you know, unshockable, they really get quite embarrassed if I come up in a frock. And if I say I'm just getting the feel of Lady Bracknell, it gets no laughs at all. In the Dog and Bear at Charing Heath. But the desire to actually dress up in those lovely clothes, the desire to hold candles, of course I didn't realize at the time I was addicted to sniffing incense, the way children are addicted to sniffing other substances now. And so I found that if I sniffed enough incense, really gobbled it, ingested it, I used to use huge pieces of charcoal. I put lots and lots of fine incense on and then guzzle it down, I did. And after a while, the Stations of the Cross used to come alive. And I used to hear heavenly voices in my head. And I forgot, actually, that I was starving because, you know, you weren't allowed to eat if you went to Mass. And so this led me then into my preoccupation with death. And so I used to go to funerals. Now, of course, I'm talking about the days before penicillin. No one here is old enough to remember how dramatic life was before penicillin. It was incredible. It was so exciting. And it was so terrifying. And God help you if you had a nail in your shoe at a Saturday night dance, since you'd have a septic leg on Sunday, and on Monday you would have a swollen calf, and on Tuesday you would have septicemia, and on Wednesday you would be in a high fever leading to a coma, dead on Thursday, buried on Saturday, and the following Saturday dance, they'd say, it's funny, you know, I was just talking to him right here where we are now. And all this would happen in a week. So one good dose of flu or tonsillitis would clear out all the old ladies in the street. We also learnt new long words like diphtheria. That was an amazing word which took me about a year to learn to pronounce. And another long one we liked was tracheotomy. The Irish Liverpool people loved those long words. Didn't matter, they didn't know what they meant. They knew it was something to do with cutting your throat. And so if they said, Maureen, have you heard, Maureen Stedman's got diphtheria? And small boys would say, Christ, tracheotomy? Which was absolutely shocking, wasn't it? We knew about that, this mysterious thing that doctors came round and cut the cartilage in your throat and inserted a tube so that you didn't suffocate. And so going to all these funerals, you see, I quite enjoy the whole drama of it. And although we occasionally fainted for want of food, or in the winter particularly the rain and the cold, and you see when the priest had finished with one funeral, he'd go off to his pot of tea, and another priest would come, but he'd leave the children there, starving still, with no breakfast, and we'd go on to the next funeral. So I got very familiar with people sobbing and weeping and all that kind of thing. One day, as I was swinging on my thurible like that and ingesting as much of it as I could because it took the hunger pangs away, I think jockeys still do it now, I was desperately trying to stay upright. The wind was in my face and the rain was dashing down. I was trembling very badly like that. And it was a child who had, an old lady rather, who was only about 104 or something. So it was a distressingly early age, you know, that her son felt. You know, my man's died, he said. She was only 104. But he loved her. And that's nice. But I'm shaking like this, you see. And suddenly at the end of the thing, it was the last funeral of the day, I felt this hand sliding down my arm. This huddle of people were there. And the hand went down my arm. Of course, I couldn't really look because that would have been immodest. And I'm shaking away like that. And into my hand, like that, I felt this small, or not too small, object pressed into my hand, and my hand was closed over it like that. And a little tap, which meant that you and I understand. You know the wonderful secrecy of a tap. It can be anything. So I was absolutely shaking with curiosity and cold. Got back to the sacristy. Opened my hand. I mean, not letting the others see. This is incredible. Half a crown. I mean, it's a stupefying amount of money in 1942. Stupefying, like giving a child a £5 note now, at least. And I thought about it, this amazing fortune that came to me, and I thought, why did he give it to me? And then suddenly I realized, and in the same moment of realization I was corrupted. I thought, he gave it to me because he thought I was sympathetic to his old mother who died aged 104. And he thought the rain in my face and my shaking with the cold was emotion. This was an amazing observation. A small child can be so easily corrupted. Well, the point about this sad story, another bleak confessional, is from then on, I was an actor. And from then on, while the other boys got threepence, I was sobbing, and it was tears and snot the whole way. And I was getting 2-shilling pieces, florins. And so at the age of 8, I didn't quite have top billing. The priest always got a top billing. But I was on the top money. And I thought, yeah, this is the way. And so since then I have been what all actors are, if they will confess it, professional pleasers. Actors are a bit like waiters in the sense, you know, they come along, the script is actually the menu, and the good waiter actually tells you this is a very good choice, or he says, I do it this way, you know, and he's talking about the tagliatelle or whatever it is, and you listen to what he says, because good waiters can be very powerful. G.K. Chesterton said, all dining out begins with fear of the waiter. And I think to some extent that is true, in this country anyway. And so there I was. Now I was an actor, but on a very small scale in Liverpool, and in only one scene, which was death scenes. But of course what kept me going, it wasn't my death scene. It was someone else's death scene. And so on I went doing that. And that really got me started. And I knew, fortunately at the time, of course, what else was happening. It was bliss to be a child in Liverpool because the bombs were falling, houses were being blown up, we didn't have to go to school. So this very dramatic time, a lot of singing going on, a lot of praying very dramatically. And this was simply a wonderful place to grow up as long as you weren't blown up. I wasn't blown up, so I thought it was wonderful. And we used to collect shrapnel from the bombs, and then came the prisoners of war, the Italians and the Germans, and of course being Irish, as you know, the Irish, especially Catholic Irish, can make murder sound like charity. And we were encouraged, you know, to adore the Italians, the Italian prisoners of war. We didn't consider them to be the enemy because the Pope, of course, was Italian. I think his name was Eugene Pacelli at the time, but I could be mistaken there. However, we were encouraged to throw rocks at the Germans. This was extraordinary, wasn't it? And so there we were, brought up in this kind of the unearned, what is it, the unearned opinion that is bigotry. But they were just passing it on from each other. We do that. Man hands on misery to man. And so the bigotry of loving the Italians but hating the Germans, hating the Northern Irish orange people where we wouldn't go through certain streets, but loving ourselves and being absolutely right, praying for the conversion of the Jews. It's a terrifying thing at the age of 9 that we could actually quote the reason for the origin, we thought, of anti-Semitism. We could actually quote that thing, you know, in St. John and St. Matthew, the rejection of Christ for Barabbas, when they would say, his blood be upon us and upon our children. And those were the hideous and hilarious influences that I was brought up with that led me finally, you know, all this long way to playing Doctor Who, which was the most fruitful time of my life because it was the most influential, in a benevolent way, influential time of my life. Recently, I want to reverse this thing about me being mistaken. I was in New Zealand a few weeks ago. I was just talking to Michael and John about that. I was in New Zealand a few weeks ago doing some comic commercials. What other sort of commercials could I do? And anyway, it went quite nicely. It was very beautiful in Auckland, and I was at the harbour side one night with my wife, and it was being good to me, and I was listening to her for a change, and it was a marvellous meal, and the wine was beautiful and everything like that. And when I called for the bill, the waiter said, "It's all right, sir, your bill's been paid." So I thought, no. I said, "Look, Cock, it's, you know, I'd much rather pay my own bill, thanks. No, let me pay." No, he said, "It's all right, sir, your bill's been paid, we've accepted the money, it's in the till." I said, okay, thanks. So he went away for a moment. I hadn't finished the wine yet, and I wasn't going to leave without that, whoever was paying it. And my wife said, "Isn't that amazing?" I said, "No, it's not amazing. It'll be some crank, you know, seen me somewhere or something, and he's going to mistake me for Patrick Troughton this time." So she said, "Oh, don't be silly." I said, "You what?" I said, "No one ever paid a bill for me and actually went. There's always a catch in it. It's a funny thing. Even when Mother Teresa paid my bill one night, she wanted to see me afterwards." So anyway, I said... So anyway, I called for my coat, and the waiter said, quite distinctly, he said, "The gentleman who paid your bill, sir, would like to say hello. He's a great fan of yours." So I winked at my wife and shrugged, and as the waiter led the way, I said, "Okay." As he led the way, I said, "Here goes 2 hours on the history of Doctor Who." So we follow in, and we're into this wonderful bar at the harbour side there. And there's a big man standing there looking at me in a light, good looking and fit, his head on one side, looking at me quizzically. And I was upset by him looking at me so quizzically, as if somehow or other there was some responsibility aimed at me. And of course, being an actor who wants to please and wanting it all to fill in a gap, actors filling gaps, I said to him, instead of saying, "You didn't need to pay my bill," I said to him, "Is your name Fleming by any chance?" And he looked rather ironical. He said, "No, my name's Baker, Piers Baker. I'm your son." So naturally I said, how do you do? What else could I say? I mean, I really was very surprised, and he looked very fit and everything like that. And what touched me very much was he didn't seem to mind that I hadn't recognized him. You know, which I really thought was marvelous, really, because, you know, some people could get quite shirty about that, couldn't they? I mean, because occasionally I pretend not to recognize my wife, and that really gets to her. But because my wife is much nicer than I am, she doesn't realize that when I'm out of work, she, you know, becomes a sort of straight man to my anxieties. Well, she does realize it, but it gets her down a bit. I mean, it really does, because, you know, when you're out of work for a long time, I live in the country, you know, where it's quite quiet. Well, actually, the graveyard's around two sides of my house. And I was, sometimes when my wife sits down for dinner, you know, and I think, Christ, how many more of these dinners are we going to have here? I mean, it's quite nice, you know, 3 or 4 times a week, but 7 days a week, I think. You know, and so we do the Times crossword very slowly. And then when it comes to the salad, because I'm slightly neurotic and living in a quiet place, I can't bear the noise of people eating salad. Especially I can't bear the noise of people eating celery. And my wife's really an aggressive eater of celery. So because it's a rather large house, it's an old school actually, I usually get up and leave the room when the celery comes on the table. And wait till so I sometimes shout, have you finished in there? And when she's finished, I come back, maybe I've done another crossword too or something like that. But this anxiety, of course, which is all selfishness, because when actors aren't acting, this actor anyway, I sometimes feel as if I'm perhaps dead. And this is a terrible confession also. What a series of confessions this is. So anyway, it got to so bad that sometimes I was sitting in the kitchen and I heard this chomping noise and I shouted the way I do. I shouted, you're eating celery in there, as if it was a sin. I thought, why did I shout that? The voice came back and said, what? I said, you're eating celery. And the voice came and she said, no, I'm not. So beset with doubt, I leapt up, rushed in there, past a big sideboard there. Fortunately, there just happened to be one of those long shoehorns that I'd left there. I have a long shoehorn because I can't bend down anymore to put my shoes on. So I seized my wife by the throat and forced her mouth open, because not only can I tell the sound of celery, I can tell the smell of it, you know, from someone at the back has had celery in the last 2 days. And so I peered down her mouth. She looked astonished. I can't tell you how astonished she looked. No celery. I said, my dear, I'm so sorry. She said, are you mad or something? And as she said that, I heard, and I thought, she's not a ventriloquist. I looked again. No celery. Looking round like that. Now, about 300 feet away, there's an old farmhouse. So I rushed to the phone. He's called Jamie Clark. I rang his number, and his wife said, hello. I said, Sue, this is Tom Baker here. She said, hello, Tom, do you want to come over for a drink? I said, no. She said, what's the matter, dear? You sound a bit frazzled. I said, listen, are you having dinner at the moment? She said, yes, we are. I said, what's Jamie doing? She said, he's eating celery. I said, what? I said, I can hear him. She said, you're off your head. We live 300 feet away. But he is a noisy eater. And so, you see, my wife obviously has quite a hard time of it as I go in and out of these terrible anxieties. You see, I don't think I could hear him. Of course I couldn't hear him. But what I could hear was my anxiety in my head. It's a kind of interesting stage I'm at now, where I hear noises in my head. The only thing is, I wish they were more interesting than the chomping of celery. Now, before I ask you to ask me some questions, there's one more thing about where I live, and that is being a bit, I don't know, romantic or trying to be brave when I'm not brave. I bought a gravestone, which you may have heard about. I did buy a gravestone. Quite a lot of people do. I knew a family, sometimes in Exchange and Mart, you see gravestone for sale. Suit a family by the name of Williams. And so people buy it. Obviously, if it's already inscribed, it's much cheaper. A blank one can be quite expensive. So somebody, they wanted money at the local church, and there was this magnificent old 18th century thing, so worn as to be flat, It was still thick, but flat. You couldn't see a name on it. So I said, I'll give you £100 for it. So the fellow said, really, Tom? Yeah, great. So I gave him £100 for it. They were terribly happy, leaning against the church porch. It was quite a sheltered place. The next day I was mowing the dead, because I mow the tummies of the dead in the season. And this is really sometimes very depressing, really. It's depressing because people are so easily cheated, aren't they? And when I get to Mr. Cheeseman's grave and it says, not dead, only sleeping, and I rev my Honda mower, you know, and he's dead. He really is. It's a terrible trick to play on him. His wife obviously didn't like him, she duped him anyway. So this goes on. So I mow their tummies and everything like that. Anyway, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a fellow chip, chip, chip. I went over there, and there he was, chipping away a name on another gravestone. And he recognized me. He said, hello, Tom. I could have embraced him. If he'd said John, I'd have screamed. So I said, hello. He said, God, I can't believe it. I said, oh, no, it's all right. I said, you know, shrugging shyly and wryly. I said, it's me, all right. He said, what can I do for you? You know, I thought he seemed a bit keen there when he said, what can I do for you? For an engraver. I said, look, I tell you what, I bought a gravestone. He said, oh, yeah. I said, yeah, it's just over there. Oh, he said, I saw that big one here. I said, I bought it for £100. He said, you had. I said, no, never mind about that. I said, while you're here, I'll give you a score. Will you put my name up there? He said, he had a look round. He said, yeah, okay, a score. I said, really, well, 2 tenors. He said, you're on. I said, how do you want it? I said, big. Top of the thing there, I want you to write Tom Baker, 1934, dash. He said, what about the second? I said, never mind the second date. Just take the score and do it. So that was fine, you see. Anyway, so he did it. And I was very impressed, and I kept going to have a look at it, you know. It was a long time since I'd had top billing like that. And I thought it looked enigmatic, 1934 dash. Anyway, time goes by, and very recently, as I've written this up, I was mowing outside the church, which is part of my duty, and suddenly I saw someone loitering in a way. Usually when people go by in their cars, they're really obvious and very nice, you know, and they peep and they go, aye, aye, Tom, and I say, aye, aye, or sometimes they say, aye, aye, doctor, and I say, God bless you, and they go. And it's kind of nice. It doesn't distress me or use me up. But there's a fellow loitering near where and I think he's loitering with a look that says, I'm going to talk to you. And I got very anxious, you know, and I began to mow with tremendous power and passion and concentrating on. And then I noticed he'd moved from there, and he was standing near my grave. And I thought, oh, God. So I spun round and went on like this, trimming and emptying the basket and all that kind of thing. And then suddenly, he was standing next to me, which gave me a terrible jump. And I said rather briskly, I said, good afternoon, something quite fascinating like that. And he said, good afternoon. He said, I've just come to put some flowers on your grave. So I said, oh, yes? Yes, he said, I thought I'd come from Chatham, he said, and I thought I'd come and to pay my respects. And I thought, what's going on in this man's head? Why is he paying his respects when I'm standing in front of him? He said, yes, I've put the flowers on the grave. I said, have you? That's very kind of you. Thinking, oh, maybe he's right, I've died. And so I'm condemned to be mowing forever. He said, yes. And just then, a car went by, a Volkswagen or something. He said, that's a marvelous, marvelous machine you've got there. So I said, no, that's not mine. I said, I've got a Peugeot. No, he said, I'm thinking about your mower, your Honda 217. I thought, my God, he knows something about Hondas as well. I said, oh, yeah, yes. He said, anyway, I won't bother you. He said, just wanted to pay my respects. After all, he said, I'd like to remind you, you are the senior doctor now. I said, yes, well, thanks. So I shook his cold hand, and off he went, you see. So I stormed in with the mower, put it away like that. And I thought about this and thought about it. And the end of the afternoon came. And I went back to the grave, my grave, stone, and scrawled across it in chalk was the word wanker. Well, you may laugh. I was actually I'm absolutely appalled at your reaction. I felt quite desecrated. But it was very, very chastening, actually, that that's what he thought about me. Of course, it's a word which is commonly used. Maybe he was using it subtly, in a way which I don't know about. But I have a feeling that he was using it in the popular way. And it did depress me. It really did depress me. Right. Well, I won't go on anymore. I'll give you a chance now. Anyone want to ask me anything? No, not a single question.
What's your favorite story?
What's my favorite what? Story? The girl asked me, what's the favorite story in Doctor Who? I don't know, really. You know, because I can't separate them as stories, because it was all one kind of crazy patchwork. Because, you know, I never did as Elizabeth will tell you, or has told you, you know, we worked on 4 or 6 scripts at a time, and I never knew what was going on. When people used to say to me, what I like about your performance, Tom, you have this kind of surprised quality. And I don't actually add, but I'll confess now, since I'm in the confessional vein, I'll confess to you, actually, the reason why I look surprised is I never really did know what was going on. And I realized after a while that that was the best way to approach it. Because, of course, you know, in real life, we don't know what's going on, do we? I mean, that's why I sometimes fight with directors and always lose. When they tell me, when we're doing a domestic, especially a domestic scene, as opposed to a street scene, for example, directors say, no, Tom, people just don't do that. And I have to ask him very sharply, how does he know? Because we actually don't know what goes on in people's domestic scenes. We think we know. We know about our own domestic scene. But most of our views on how domestic scenes take place is from the films in the old days and now from television. So you have the amazing thing now that people in Liverpool are actually talking in the speech rhythms and with the attitudes of people on Brookside. It's not real at all. So people gradually have acquired, as they watch the soaps, which are the great success story of television without any argument at all, they watch this kind of rarefied world, and they take on the characteristics of the thing and think that that is domestic life, and including directors. So that if you want to walk around your house in, I don't know, in a funny kind of way, like that, because you're a bit nervous, or perhaps like me, not right in the head, directors like to say, don't do that, Tom. And you say, why not, Ralph? Or sometimes Tristan. Why not, Tristan? He says people don't do that. And you say, all right, where do you get your information from, cock? This is my house. Huh? It's right, isn't it? It's my house, and my wife is in the kitchen. She can't see me walking, and I'm walking across the room, and I feel like doing that. Why can't I do that in my own house? He says, because I don't think it's interesting, and I'm the boss. And you say, okay. So I stopped doing it. You know, so I'm always beaten. But we don't really know, do we, how? And so in Doctor Who, we were allowed certain kind of drolleries, so that when I was in Boston once, I think Elizabeth was there, someone from MIT or something, who was doing a PhD on Doctor Who, said, he said, you know, Mr. Baker, I never saw an actor, you're so extraordinary, I never saw an actor like walk through a door like you do. So I was really rather pleased about this, because I do remember John Dexter, the great world-famous director and crusher of actors like me, said, he said to me, you know, Baker, you're so boring, you can't even walk through a door sincerely. I was so frightened of him, I wanted to tell him, I never did want to walk through a door sincerely, I wanted to walk through a door interestingly. It's not easy to do. Jeremy Irons walks through a door quite shiftily, I think. Yes, quite shiftily, yes. But we won't talk about Jeremy Irons. Anyway, so, interesting, the directors tell you to do that, and you won't do it. So the man said, I've never seen anyone walk through a door like that. So they had this big screen, you see, and to demonstrate the point, they ran a scene. And then another scene, they'd be coming through a door into the TARDIS or something. And I looked at it, and they all clapped, the way the Americans are so good-hearted, and all agreed with him that I came through a door in a very unusual way. And I had to tell him, I just had to tell him, I shouldn't have done, but there's a streak of malice in me somewhere. I said, you don't understand. We had to walk through a door like that, because otherwise the whole set would shake and they would do it again. At the BBC, everybody walks through doors carefully, haven't you noticed? And they always close it and lean back, don't they, slightly, and hope this time it's going to close. When I used to argue with Graham Williams that I like the idea that the on Gallifrey or within the TARDIS, that the thing about the architecture there was it shook all the time. They didn't like that. They didn't like that at all, so I had to give way, otherwise they would have sacked me. Next question. Was that the only one? Go on.
Do you enjoy doing the radio programs? You don't,
I enjoy, the man asked me, do I enjoy doing the radio program? The thing is that as an actor, I enjoy really, I can really do nearly anything. There are one or two exceptions, like a script I was sent for Chalk the other day, and I stayed up one night because usually I'm in bed by 8. I find actually that if I can get 14 hours sleep, I can be really quite lively at work the next morning. And so I get to bed before 8 if I possibly can. But I stayed up till nearly 25 past 9. I was absolutely drained. And I watched Chalk for 25 minutes or something. And I was appalled by it. And so anyway, then I read the scripts, and I was appalled by the scripts and said, no thanks, I didn't want to do that. I sent them a fax actually, saying, I don't want to do this. I'd rather be dead. So that's probably ended my career. Now, I've always wanted to get into light entertainment, and that was the first offer. And, I said something like that. My wife said, is that wise, sending a fax like that? And it probably wasn't wise. In fact, it was silly, but then I am silly, yes. So I enjoy anything, really, except Chalk, yes.
You become very successful as religious men and doctors.
Yeah.
What's the reason for that?
Well, yes, I mean, the thing is that, these people who seem to know everything, like doctors, we have turned the doctors into the high priests, but of course doctors began with kind of Asclepius and all those people and Hippocrates. They began as kind of magicians. And so doctors historically have been, and especially now since people can't bear any pain or anything, doctors have become high priests, and the priests themselves have become just social workers, and the bishops and so on. And so when they want one of these appalling characters to be played, they say, well, get Tom, he's got no taste at all. Because you go to the doctor now, which occasionally I do. I went the other day and said, is everything all right? He said, you should pant on till Easter. And I told my wife that. She said, but it's next week. But when I said, I've got creaky joints, Dr. Porter says, well, what do you expect at your age? It's not very helpful, is it? I mean, he might have just stroked my leg or something. I don't know what. Hello? Who was my favorite assistant? Well, I had 2 favorite assistants, but I could only marry one. My first favorite assistant was Elizabeth, who's here today. She was my first because she laughed. She knows how to manipulate someone like me. She found my jokes very funny, and so naturally I was a complete victim, yes. And then there was another one called Lala. Yeah, Romana, her name was. I think, yes. And then, due to a misunderstanding, we got married. But then, that's the way most people get married, really. It's a kind of misunderstanding. I really think it should be very, very difficult for people to get married, especially when they're fond of each other. Because, I mean, especially when people are infatuated, since their brains aren't functioning, are they? I mean, your knees shake, and your heart skips, and everything the other person says becomes fascinating, and you can't concentrate. You feel ill. I think people really should go to nursing homes to have passes. It's certainly a very bad state of mind to make such a very serious decision as getting married. Because it can be, it hasn't been with me, I've been very lucky in that way, it can be very sticky, unraveling marriages. Believe me. But I was lucky, yes. Next. Yes, ma'am? If I could live the life of anyone in history. Well, I must say, in my wild moments, I've really fancied myself as playing God. Because I really would like to sort a few people out and fire a few thunderbolts. I really would, And also, I tighten up the script in the Old Testament. Because, I mean, I really do think, I don't want to labor this point, but I will. I really do think, actually, that Jews get a hard time for being a stiff-necked people. And they go on and on and on. I mean, and look at that awful thing about the plagues of Egypt. Before God hit that bone-headed Pharaoh, when Moses and his brother were there, Aaron, with his, when he threw, gosh, I'd like to have seen that. When the Pharaoh said, well, go on, impress me, and he threw down his stick, didn't he? They turned into a snake. And then the frogs. Oh, and then the boils. Wouldn't that be marvelous? To go, and they all break out in boils and abscesses. It really would be good. So I think really anything less than that would be a disappointment. So yes, God, I'm afraid, yes. No one else? No one, no. Yeah, yes. What was it like with her? It was heaven. It really was absolute heaven, honestly. Yeah, thank you. That's a nice question, yeah. It didn't last too long, you know, because sometimes, you know, people don't know. It's very hard, isn't it, between... Actually, have you noticed when you go to a party how difficult some people, that interminable when they get up and say, well, I'm off now, and you think, great. My love actually dies if 5 minutes later they're still there. I say, why did you go, Graham? I can't, but you know the people who, it's because they watch television. In television, no one actually says, I'm off, and walks through a door. When they get to the door, they always stop and say, and another thing, and you think, oh God, here it goes again. And so it is with people. It's very difficult, isn't it, to know when to call it off. The problem between people who are fond of each other, or have been fond of each other, because it's so ineffably sad when fondness leads to distaste and unhappiness. It's very difficult for two people to be in sync, isn't it? I mean, I remember saying to a girl one day, she said, what are you thinking about, Tom? And I said to her cruelly, because I've been drinking a lot, I said, I've just been thinking. I said, I was just thinking what I ever saw in you. And she said, oh! That's the way she did. She was camp. She was an actress as well. She said, oh! I said, what is it? She said, I was just thinking exactly the same thing about you. So we shook hands and off she went, and I became, I wanted to be her best man. I mean, you know, it was all right, yes. Yes, again. It wasn't hard. Well, it was because my knees used to creak. I believe John Leeson might be here today. John Leeson, I cannot tell you how, when I had to stoop down, because every time they photographed me with K9, I had to stoop down to get the two-shot. They couldn't do it with the little dog down there. So it was quite difficult at times. Whereas in the rehearsal room, when John Leeson was the dog and not just the voice of the dog, it was very funny and very touching, you know. He was just a great dog, a wonderful, wonderful dog. He was the best dog I've ever had with him. And I think, you know, the BBC were very bad the way they had him put down. They really did, because they wasted him. I think they could have created a great character there. He was so wonderful, yeah. Anyone else there? No? Yes?
Have you any memories about doing the two Argos records, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
The man asked me if I have any recollection of doing recordings of Journey to the Centre of the Earth and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. No. No, I haven't really. In fact, there are big gaps in the 70s. You know, I've written a book, and I really had to ring a lot of people up and say, listen, George, if you can tell me what I was doing between 1975 and 1977 in the afternoons, it was the afternoons that were the blanks. Because, you know, coming to the BBC, going to Soho, you know, when I became famous as Doctor Who, it opened up a whole new world, and the kind of crazy world of Soho, you know, deadbeat journalists and old flops and old puffs and old queens of all descriptions and colours, and some fine artists, you know. So one met people like Francis Bacon or people like that, great funny writers like Dan Farson, and so they consumed me. I liked being with them because they seemed to be, you know, kind of doing that to life, whereas I've been very nervous of life. But now, it's funny, isn't it, that I'm not at all nervous of life now. I open up my arms and open up my eyes and my mouth and seek to embrace life. It's death that I'm frightened of now. Isn't it funny, huh? The way we check, yes.
Did you like playing the role of the Doctor?
I did like playing Doctor Who because I always won. Every week I used to win. You must have noticed that. No matter how much they used to shout, I mean the villains, I always beat them in the end, didn't I? I used to get a bit fed up with having to blow them up. Apart from the way they didn't realize John Leeson so well, I thought I used to regret. I used to want to do things like, well, you know, shake pepper into the top of the Daleks. Because I imagine that the children would have liked that. Shake some pepper. So they just sneezed forever, and that was it. And they couldn't communicate, because they couldn't do all that shouting and use the word exterminate, because they were sneezing all the time. So they keep saying, exit, exit, and it would go on forever and ever. And we do a long pulling out shot like that, and all these Daleks spinning round, sneezing away, for 2 centuries, or until the next story, yes.
What was your favourite enemy?
My favourite enemy? You mean my favourite monster? Lalla Ward. Yes, by a long sea mile, yes. Yeah? What was my most embarrassing moment? Oh my God, there's a young journalist over there. Actually, nearly every moment of my life has been an embarrassment, really. I can't think of one more than the other. I think, no, I can't straight away. I mean, it's all been so embarrassing, really. People have been very kind to me, yes?
So the comedy do you appreciate?
Well, I'm very interested in the comedy of anxiety, because I'm in a permanent state of anxiety. And therefore, I get very tired when I watch. I mean, this is, just between us here, and I wouldn't say this in an interview in the press, so I'll just say it here. Sometimes when I watch what passes for domestic comedy or situation comedy on the television, I get very tired. In fact, I find it unwatchable nearly, not because people aren't clever, but of the predictability, the way quite a lot of comedy just kind of panders to prejudice all the time, as opposed to attacking prejudice. So I'm more interested in the more radical stand-up comedians, especially when they first get going. You see, it's very hard to be radical when you become successful. So quite a lot of the young stand-up comedians who were amazing a few years ago, when they become very wealthy and very popular and loved, they stop wanting to, blow people up there or attack prejudices. But when I watch the role of women in domestic comedy or situation comedy, I could weep that it still gets laughs, knowing how conservative the British audiences are about comedy. That women are largely still crumpet, that they walk in funny ways to wiggle their bottoms, so that some smart ass can make a remark, or that old people can be criticized. I don't mean actually to get too political about, this ageism or what kind. What I mean is that, there's more, isn't there, to life being funny than someone being old, or someone being ugly, or someone having a large bottom. I mean, for example, I find it very difficult to look at women's magazines, because it enrages me, because it seems to me that women are terrorized by women's magazines. And women's magazines, although men may make some of the executive decisions, the day-to-day editing is done by women. And so types of women are exposed, and they say to all women, all ordinary women who aren't models or actresses, they say, that's what you should look like. And I disagree with that, actually. I don't think that anyone can say that's what you should look like. I think, it's much more the celebration of, our mutual anxieties and insecurities, and the lovely mistakes and delusions that we have. I think that's more fun, really. I used to go out with an old actress. She was about 79. I won't tell you her name, because she's still alive, although she's now about 86. She was as lecherous as a monkey. And she didn't drink very much, because she used to fall over very easily, but I used to take her about for a while. We used to go to restaurants together. I liked being seen with her. She was very funny, and she adored me, so naturally, I'm a bit weak if people adore me. I mean, I'm a bit weak if they like me, but if they adore me, I'm absolutely, so I used to take her about a bit. When she'd had 2 or 3, what's that wonderful Italian drink where you put the coffee beans in? What, Zambuca? That's right, when she had a couple of those. And she always used to pounce in the taxi, Lecherous as a monkey she was. Oh, darling, she'd say, come on, give it to me. I'd say, don't. I used to say, Maureen, don't pull yourself together. And the bloody cab driver would be going, God almighty, God all bloody mighty. Maybe he was the cab driver, who tortured me later. I don't know. But I mean, she was so wonderful to be with, and her appetites and everything like that. I mean, it's just that she was then very old, but it didn't stop me loving her in my own way. Gosh, you fellows are very curious today. Why did I want to leave it? What did he say?
How did you want to leave?
Did I want to leave?
How did I want to leave?
Oh, that's a long story. I didn't want to leave lying down. because I thought that was a rotten shot, actually, yeah. No, I didn't. I wanted to leave. Yeah, I wanted to go away into the sunset. It's a terrible idea of mine, but there we are. Yeah, who's that there?
Do you ever have any problems with the long scarf?
I used to fall over that long scarf all the time, and the technicians would think it was terribly funny to stand on it when I was running, you know. So sometimes in a rehearsal I'd run off and someone would be standing on my scarf, you know, and I'd go ask them a tip. But yeah, they used to... Technicians have got a very kind of slapstick sense of comedy, yeah.
Did you act like the doctor sometimes?
Did I act like the doctor sometimes? Yeah. Yeah, I did. I mean, I was the doctor. You know, the thing is that playing doctor, when you're playing a hero, one of the problems is facing an actor is the predictability. Heroes are predictable, and especially benevolent ones like Doctor Who. You know, there's not going to be no ferocious, gratuitous violence or even really bad manners, no sex, of course, and no individual, you know, sadism. So all this is predictable. So what charms the actor who tries to do it, and thank goodness no one, as far as I know, has ever failed in it, they've all done it well in their own way, is that how can you be surprising within the predictability of the part? Now, this is a very serious question indeed, because exactly the same question actually, you know, applies when we think about our own lives, about whether it's our own domestic life or whether it's their life in the alehouse. You know, and I go to alehouses early in the evening sometimes, and I see certain people coming, and people say, oh, here's John the car, here's John the brush, or whoever it is coming in. And sometimes my heart sinks. When I go down to the pub, and I say to them, because most people are decent, I say, what sort of a day have you had, Richard? And my heart sinks as I ask it. I'm such a hypocrite, because I know he's going to tell me, you know. I mean, I don't know how he keeps going. And then someone else comes in, I say, hi, Brett, what sort of a day was it at school? And he tells me. And then I'm waiting for someone, and then someone will say, what sort of a day have you had, Tom? And then depending on what I'm reading, boy, do I lay it on, you know. And someone says, you know, sometimes, Tom, I think you make this up a bit. I say, no. You know, because how can we beat the kind of utter predictability of it all? I don't know, it's a hard question. Yeah. Yes? That's a little voice. I can't hear you, dear. I'm so sorry.
You've recently been playing the doctor in commercials. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah. It was just that in New Zealand where, you know, I'm still quite popular there because of the video, or they're showing it. They wanted me to persuade people to think about the future. And so I had to appear, you know, because I'm licensed to do that as Doctor Who, and they dressed me up as Doctor Who, and I had to say, you know, I said, I've seen the future. And you weren't there. That was to frighten them, you know. But then I had to say, I didn't quite mean that, but I've seen the future, and it's looking good if you ring TARDIS, 0800 TARDIS 6159, which you're allowed to do in New Zealand. It was a great hit, apparently, yeah. So, and it was funny to do. And then I met, you know, my son. Yes? I didn't, he asked me what about the Universal Pictures was that. I didn't see that film. I asked my wife about it because, you know, she watches things for me if I've gone to the pub or if I'm actually just standing in the corner chopping the celery for her. I said, will you watch it for me? I can't bear it. And record it. And if it's any good, I'll watch it. And she watched it. My wife, who's very fair, she said, well, you know, she said it was okay. It was just a kind of adventure in America and was not mysterious. Now, I'm not interested in anything which isn't mysterious, you know. I've always wanted to be mysterious, and especially if people are aware of me, but that's because I'm an actor. I was at a meeting the other day, and we didn't stop for lunch because I was rather demanding. And these three people I didn't know very well. One was a very important man, the head of a publishing house. And when the lunch came in, you know, sandwiches and things like that, I was watching these amazing people, very clever, and could hold the whole narrative of a novel or an autobiography in their heads. And suddenly, when the chap opened a packet of crisps, he became quite commonplace. And you watch, it's actually impossible. Sometimes you see a mysterious girl come into the pub and you think, gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful to be with her and sit down and talk about something or listen to her or something. And then suddenly you see she gets a packet of crisps and she tears it open and begins to eat the crisps. And suddenly all the mystery and all the allure and all the appetite for her just goes poof. Did I wear a wig? No, that was all mine. No, it was all mine. It was amazing, wasn't it? It was like an old flock mattress, yes. I had a terrible shock recently when someone, you know, they're always on Teleaddicts or something, that dreadful, what's his name, Noel something. Oh, boy, would I give him a thunderbolt if I was even an archangel. But he's always showing, you know, it's very easy now. There's a great deal of television which is just made up of mocking television. Anyone can look up, if you've got the budget to buy the footage, put up the footage like that, someone says something, cut up to you, and you make a daft remark. Anyone. Clive James, who is simply brilliant man and a lovely writer, is so utterly despicable as his researchers set up all those patsy jokes, you know. It's just a doddle. So when I saw myself anyway in this clip, don't get me on about those two, when I saw myself running upstairs, do you know, I burst into tears. And it's not all that long, well, it is that long ago, actually, yes, it was. But now I can't run upstairs so easily, not without the banister. So probably my career is drawing to its close, yes. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Go on. Did I enjoy appearing in what? Oh, yeah, but I think I meant to say earlier, really, I was trying to think of a way of saying it without swearing or horrifying you. Yes, actually, the thing is, you see, I think I've only got, a very small talent, and that talent is, I can enjoy practically any old nonsense, really. Yeah, I can, except short, yes. What? Oh, I am still recognized as a doctor. I don't think people recognize me when I'm walking along. I think people have got extraordinary memories for voices or something like that. So sometimes I'm standing next to someone and they, you know, they remember me then. But I'm not recognized much in the street when I'm moving. If I keep still, because people, you know, often have got nothing to do. So I'm often recognized by the unemployed. And of course this makes me terribly sad. When I was in Manchester last year or something in the winter, walking down boring old Deansgate, turning into St. Peter Street, some really gloomy bits down there, aren't there? Maybe it will improve since you were bombed. But as I was walking along there, I used to meet, this happened to me, you know, 20 times easily. And suddenly there's a young man there. Have you noticed beggars have such lousy script writers? It's a terrible thing, you know, because I'm very willing to help. And so they say, have you got any small change? And it's so common that they all copy each other because they're in business, I suppose. And business tends towards copying. You don't really take it in. But it worries me about young people. Of course it does, but I'm reasonable. So I stop, you see, and there's a chap, and I'd say, yeah, here, cock, have a pound or 50p. And he'd say, and you got the time? I say, you have my watch. So he'd give me a watch. And then he'd say, Christ, Doctor Who? I'd say, yeah, that's right. You've got a good memory. Christ, he'd say, Doctor Who? And I'd say, yes. And he'd say, Doctor Who? And I'd think, Christ, he's got to stop soon. I say, yeah, look, I said, have £2. No, he said, I don't want the money. And he looked around desperately. He said, listen, can't you get us out of here? And I had this amazing thought that I wanted to say to him, listen, outside Dillon's, that little alleyway, going down to Boodle and Dunthorne, I said, I'll be there at 7:45, and you'll hear the noise, you'll recognize it. So put the word round. And so I imagine the word going round among all the poor and those young men who were deeply moved at the sight of me. Instead of being comforted, you see, they were wounded and hurt, because when they saw me, they were catapulted back in time to 15 or 17 years ago, when they were 9 or 10 years old, sitting on sofas eating fish fingers and tasting tomato ketchup and watching Doctor Who and seeing their mothers there. And they must, in their small imaginations, have been full of hope. And now it's gone, and the next time they see me, I'm walking down Deansgate and they're begging. And they are actually now part of a society which doesn't want them. Of course that society doesn't say we don't want them. But we have now, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution and the movement of people, we have a large minority of young people that society doesn't want. I am amazed at their patience that they don't rise up and my throat, or whatever. But maybe because I was a doctor, they wouldn't do it. But anyway, to go back to my fantasy, that just by Boodle and Dunthorne, isn't it incredible that on that corner there, watches £15,000, the TARDIS would materialize, and all the chaps and girls selling the big issue would be in a line, and anyone else who wanted to join as well, who was down. And I'd open the door and I'd say, come in, there's plenty of room. And they'd all pile in, and some bloody do-gooder would be passing, there's always one of them going there, or a policeman off duty, and he'd say, Christ, what's going on there, Bert? And he'd watch, but it would be too late, and at last, 600 people pile in, and just as the policeman says, excuse me, this is number 41279 here in St. Peter's Square, just as he got there, whoosh, we'd be gone. Wouldn't that be marvellous? And then the next day, in that predictable paper of yours, it would say, do you know what the buggers would say? They'd say, who's stolen all our poor? Who's stolen all our homeless? Yeah. Because the buggers would want them back to be homeless, because so many people are made to feel good by some other people's pain. They feel better. But while they're here, Manchester, like Liverpool or any other city, is full of spaces. No one needs to be homeless. We don't have in our complex society. We simply don't have the process. That's all. We do not have the process to put people. We don't have it. You know yourself. I've worked here 5 or 6 empty hospitals. For a few hundred homeless people. What's that? Anyway, don't get me onto that. Pass me. Go on. I get upset. Go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Doctor, and before that was that Seabag film, he played the bad guy.
Yeah.
You enjoy that kind of film?
Yeah, you see, the thing is, you must understand that in fiction, as in life, that the bad guy and the good guy are the same people. In this sense, that one cannot exist without the other. So if we were having dinner with a load of, say, prison officers, which I don't fancy myself, but anyway, there must be some nice ones among them, but never, I don't know anyone. But if we were talking to them after a few pints of John Smith's, what would happen is they don't really want society to become more lawful or law-abiding, because if we suddenly actually solve the problem of crime in the inner cities, they'd be all out of work. So they actually adore it. Policemen adore criminals. They love each other. Sherlock Holmes adored Moriarty, and Moriarty adored Sherlock Holmes. For without each other, they wouldn't exist. It's as if it's always that kind of sly thing, isn't it? As if one thing needs the other. Doctors don't really want to make us all healthy, otherwise they'd have nothing to do. Especially surgeons, they adore getting in there, invading us, opening them up, having a word, yes, taking a piece away. So you see, it's the same thing, so that when you play the villain, there are actors, I believe, who play the villain, in a kind of villainous way. I don't think that is the way it is. I mean, the villains, whenever I've spoken to people who've been in trouble, or whenever I've looked at, real villains when I read the press about it, they always think they're badly done by. They always say they're innocent. Mind you, in our society, they often are. I think you will have noticed that, of course. But they always think that, so that the villain must actually be very reasonable. He must be mischievous, or he must have a point of view. You can't come on. Of course, films, you all know that, but I quite like repeating it. Films are complete amalgam of cliché. They may be entertaining, or they may be boring, whatever, but they're all clichés. Film music tells us what to think. Film music tells us what the scene is about. They don't let us decide. Film music will tell you what to decide. That's why when you play film music, soundtrack, it sounds so absurd and reminds you of standing in a queue to get in to see some poxy movie. All hard men look like hard men. Wouldn't it be amazing? I wanted to do once at the BBC, because in those days I used to be able to go into meetings, and someone was talking about the idea of a child molester arriving in a district, and it was a nice idea. It hadn't been quite written, I don't think, about the effect of terror in a reasonably happy estate. And so they picture the estate, establish some characters, nice children like these two here, and so on, it's all fine. And then suddenly a child disappears and is murdered. And they show the consequence of that. And then another one disappears. And so the reasonable happiness and coexistence of all these people is absolutely in a state of terror. And so one of the characters, in fact, the villain of the piece who did it, I wanted to play him, and I wanted to play him as the guy who is supporting them, you know, who goes around and weeps and holds hands with the mothers and says, you know, we've got to do this, and leading the hunt, organizing vigilante, kind of wanting to organize vigilantes and getting it. So when I put this to, I won't say who it was because that would be unkind to him. Oh, he said, Tom, stop it, you can't do that. You can't do that. I said, why can't I do that? He said, because you don't look like a child molester, which made me very angry indeed, because I said, isn't that the whole point of it? That very few people are hurt by strangers. They're actually hurt by people they know, by members of their families. And I could be absolutely amazing because I could do that so brilliantly, and we could put that point of view over, that we don't know what anyone looks like. We don't, of course. If they get on television or the police show you pictures of them, you show the police point of view. They don't show, you never see a picture of a famous criminal looking quite charming and smiling, do you? With his baby in his arms. No. Yeah, go on.
What was your favourite gadget?
My favourite gadget had to be the sonic screwdriver. And for this reason, it was absolutely important in the narrative of Doctor Who that when we were trapped somewhere, the only way to get out, whether it was down a mine or whatever it was with a sonic screwdriver. But if the writers didn't want us to get out at that particular moment, I used to go zzz, zzz, and then I'd look at Elizabeth. You must remember this. I say, Elizabeth, I mean, Sarah Jane. I said, even the sonic screwdriver won't open this one. And she'd say, ah. And so, you know, it was a wonderful device without which Doctor Who could not have gone on. Yeah? Are you telling me to stop?
I'm telling you, Tom, it's come to your time, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Yes, I've got to go. I'm so sorry. Bye-bye, and thank you. Yeah. Well, I'll see you all.
I was going to say, if people want to come and take some pictures while you're here, we'll do it.
Right.
So if anyone wants to come forward just to the front here to take a photograph of Tom, please take advantage of the opportunity now.
Yes, and then will I be signing something?
And then we'll be signing something afterwards. Give you a short break to have a drink.
Yeah, well, actually, when it comes to the signing, they could take the pictures then, couldn't they? Well, if they want to. I don't mind what you do. You can have a piece of me this afternoon. Oh, yes.
Please.
Yes. Who's going to take it? Go on, take my arm.
Just
That's a nice jacket.